Okay, so I've got two swatches here. You'll notice I have got the two sort of main methods of mosaic crochet. So I've got an overlay mosaic swatch here and an inset mosaic one here. Now, if you look, they're a similar height. The inset one is actually a little lower, but if you count up the number of rows that I've done, on this swatch, there are 22 rows in total. Because we remember we turn at the end of each row, so that's why the pattern is stretched, but there's actually 22 rows there, and there's only actually 20 on the overlay. And if you notice, the overlay swatch is actually a little bit taller, so my sort of 22 rows there is probably equivalent to around about 18 on the overlay. So the reason for doing this little video is mainly because I know some people they love the envelope border so much they want to do it around inset mosaic pieces too. So although you don't need it for covering up the ends, it can just be a really nice way to finish the blanket. Now the problem is if you were to work in a stitch for every row on your inset mosaic, as you can see, it's actually shorter than it is wide, so you would then get too many stitches, so it'd ruck up. Where obviously on the overlay mosaic, that's basically square, so we're okay. So the point of this is to show you a little sort of new method that I've come up with where we're still going to be using, a chain space at each end of every row on our inset mosaic, as I've been doing on my overlay patterns for a while. But we won't sort of be using them all. So first of all, I'm going to take you through like adapting a pattern to add that stitch, because it's not as straightforward on inset as it is on overlay either. I'll explain a little bit more of that as we go along. But so yeah, so what I've done is I've actually rewritten my Baubles inset mosaic pattern from sort of 3 years ago to include the extra stitch, and then I'll show you sort of the border methods afterwards. Okay, so let's get these swatches out of the way. So what I've done, Baubles is another change I've made to Baubles. It was originally a 22 stitch repeat, and I've now made it 24, so you'll be able to mix and match it easily with lots of my other designs, like sort of Norway spruce, the Letitia's Holiday or Letitia's Garden, all of those sort of patterns they all fit into a 48 stitch repeat. So Baubles will now fit into that 48 stitches as well. So there's a couple of little changes there. So I have now started, I've actually got 80 chains, which is like the half of this is to make a blank or a little swatch, that's about half the size of the blanket. So if you're making the blanket as written in the pattern, you will need 152. So that's a multiple of 48 plus 7 stitches or 8 chains. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so officially it's actually, if you're not mixing and matching with anything else, you actually need a multiple of 24 plus 31 stitches or 32 chains. Okay, so anyway, get your chain ready. So I'm now going to just start as we always do. So I'm going to ignore the first chain because that's our turning chain. That's why you have one more chain than you do the number of stitches that you're going to want. So I'm ignoring that first one. And again, if you're familiar with the overlay mosaic, my overlay mosaic patterns, and you want to do the envelope border, you'll know that I say we need to basically not work into this part of the chain, but twist that round, and we're going to be working into this back bar, back bump, whatever you want to call it there. Okay, so we have one edge stitch, then we're going to have an edge chain. So again, that's like we do in the overlay mosaic. So we're going to miss one chain, and now we're going to just work along our double crochets just into that back bump, and I'll show you in a moment why we're working into that back bump. Okay, so if you see, by doing that, if I now take my hook out and show you, we have now got two loops left at the bottom, because we're going to need that if we're making an envelope border, because we're going to be working one border. It's two borders you join together, so one you'll be working into that loop, and the other one you'll be working into the other loop. So that's why we need to work into the back bar. Okay, so now if you don't want to do an envelope border, and you want to do, because actually my Baubles pattern will also show you an alternative single border that you can do, then if you find the back bump difficult, you can always just work into the chain as normal, although I personally think it looks nicer like that. So anyway, you carry along working your double crochets into this back bump, back bar, whatever you want to call it, until you have 2 chains left, and I'll see you there. Right, so I've now got to my last 2 chains, and I've just double checked I've got the correct number of stitches. Now, what I should have mentioned as well is what you'll probably notice, because I'm adding on 7 stitches to my sort of multiples of 24 or 48, where normally I would add on 5 recently. Now, the reason for that is because this is inset mosaic, and I'm adding a chain at the end. I wanted to make it as easy as possible for you to follow the pattern and also to find those edge chains at the end. So I've basically added, so we've got our standard like very edge or border stitches at each end. Then you have your chain. Then I've added another double crochet next to that. And that means that each row can start the same. So you'll have 1 edge stitch, one double crochet, 1 chain, 1 double crochet at each end at least. I mean, you may have more double crochets than that depending on the pattern rows. If I hadn't have included that extra optional double crochet, you would have some rows where you will have your edge chain and then you'll start immediately with maybe like 2 chains, miss 1 stitch. So I didn't want to confuse you with that. Absolutely, if you don't like that extra sort of blank plain stitch between your edge chain and your main bit of the pattern, you can remove that optional double crochet there, which means you would need 2 less stitches than I've just done. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. It'll hopefully make a bit more sense as we go through, and I'll just show you the first few rows of the pattern as well. So if you're making the blanket, what you should now have is you'll have your 3 lots of 48, because we've got 6 lots of 24, I should say. You'll have 6 lots of 24 stitches for your baubles. So that takes you to, what does that take you to? Terrible at maths here. 6 lots of 24 is 144, I think. Yeah. And then you'd have like +1 to even it up. So that's 145. And then I've added on the other 2 optional chains, optional double crochets. Okay, so that means between your chains you should now have, so since you've got your edge stitch chain, then you should now have 147 double crochets. I've only got 75 because I'm making a half size, so that is 3 lots of 24 plus the 3. So hopefully I haven't confused you completely. But if you're making the blanket, you will now have 147 stitches after your chain. And we're now just going to do another chain at this end and finish off. And you can put that where you like in that chain because that's the edge. Finish off with 1 edge chain. So we've now done our first foundation row. Okay, the first 4 rows I've called foundation rows because they aren't part of the actual sort of pattern repeat. So the stitch repeats will still do, but when you go to the rows, these first 4 rows aren't going to be included. You'll be like repeating from the next row up. Okay, so I've called these foundation rows to hopefully avoid confusion. So now, because this is inset mosaic, we're not cutting. We're going to do a turning chain, turn round, and exactly the same really on every row. You're going to be doing a double crochet in every double crochet and a chain over every chain. So that's our edge chain. And on this row, our second foundation row, we haven't got any it's all nice and plain in the first foundation row, so it's literally, we're just now going to go back and do exactly the same as we did on the first foundation row. Really, we're just going to be doing double crochets all the way along until you get to that edge chain. Then you do 1 chain, skip the chain, and finish off with a final double crochet. So once you've done that, come back and we'll be starting to create a pattern on our foundation row 3. Okay, so I've now done foundation row 2. So got to the end, I've just basically turned over. So that was the wrong side, and now back onto the right side again. Going to leave my main colour here attached. And I'm going to pick up I'm calling this CC2. Now Baubles looks brilliant just done in the 2 colours if you want, but I've written the chart and the instructions to use 2 contrast colours, just to kind of give you the idea is that this sort of colour will be used for like the little tops of the baubles. You know, they tend to be like gold or silver or whatever, to sort of hold with a little hole in the top so you can connect it to your tree. So that's the idea of that, but you can equally work it all in the same colour if you want, but I'm using this colour. So to join a new colour, all we're going to do before we make our turning chain, I'm just going to make sure you leave a long enough end so you can weave it in at the end. So leave at least sort of probably about 6 inches, 5-6 inches, okay? And then we're just going to pull that through there, and then if we pull this one down tight, that holds it, okay? So then now we're going to do our turning chain, okay? So 1 turning chain. So like I say, just pull your main colour down there, and that now disappears, and your turning chain is now in your new colour, okay? So then we always start every row, we're going to work into this first stitch, we're going to do 1 double crochet. So what I'm going to do, just to hold this in place while we're working on it, just work over that end just for that first stitch, and we pull that end down. It's all nice and neat there, okay? So then we can carry on. So we've always got, let's say that is our first double crochet, then 1 double crochet there, and remember I've now added this extra optional double crochet in there, so that every row on mine is going to start with double crochet, chain, and then double crochet. If you don't like the extra double crochet, because that will leave a sort of little dotted line up the edge of your blanket, then you can skip this one, or you wouldn't have that there, you'd have 2 less stitches, so you wouldn't be doing that first one, okay? So now for foundation row 3, I've now got to do 1 more double crochet. So now we start making our pattern. Now with inset mosaic, that works a little bit differently to overlay, because what we need to do on this row, we are going to be leaving spaces where we are going to, when we then come back in a couple of rows time using our main colour again, we're going to work over the spaces, and that'll create the pattern. Whereas with overlay mosaic, you work into the back loops just all the way along, and then you just cover some of them up. We just need to sort of think ahead with inset mosaic. So you're thinking, where am I going to need to put that colour on the next row, and then leave a space for it. Okay, so what we now need, we're going to actually be leaving we're going to have 2 stitches in here in a couple of rows time. So we need to leave a gap for them. So we're not going to do 2 chains, because if you chain loosely, you can just do 2 chains there. Most people tend to chain a little bit tighter than they do their other stitches. And if that's the case, as it is for most people, you're now going to have 3 chains, okay, and miss 2 stitches. So we always do 1 more chain than the number of stitches we're missing, okay? So then 1 double crochet. So that is all before we get to, if you're looking at the chart, there is like a box in like a bold line box, and the stitches in that I'll repeat. So we've now done all of this before we start our first repeat. So our repeat now starts with another 5 double crochets. 1. So in the written instructions, where the box is, I've actually used an asterisk. Okay, so that now gives me a total there of 6 double crochets there. So now I've got 4 chains, 2, 3, 4, which means I'm going to be missing 1, 2, 3 stitches, then 1 double crochet, okay, then another 4 chains, 2, 3, 4. So again I'm missing 1, 2, 3 stitches, and then I've got 6 double crochets. So what you'll now see, if you're following the written instructions, is you'll see a little hashtag. Just lay that out so you can see that. So when you see a hashtag in the written instructions, you can ignore that until you get to your final repeat. That is just to tell you where, when you're on your final repeat, you're going to stop a little bit early because you need to do something different at the end, okay? So for now, we pretend that hashtag isn't there. And right after that, you've got a little thing in square brackets. So when you see square brackets in my written instructions, that tells you whatever's inside them, you repeat the amount of times it says afterwards. Okay, so we have got 1, 2, 3 chains, miss 2 stitches, 1 double crochet. So that's one of the repeats, and we've got to do it twice, so I've just got to do that again. 1, 2, 3, miss 2 stitches, 1 double crochet. Okay, so that now takes us to the end of our first repeat. So our repeat is there. Okay, so as you can see, we're now going to be starting again with our 5 double crochets. So I'll go through that once more with you. So we start the repeat with 5 double crochets, 2, 3, 4, 5. So when we now add that to the one that was at the end of our last repeat, we've now got 6 double crochets in a row. Okay, so now it's 4 chains, 3, 4. So we're missing 3 stitches, 1 double crochet, then 4 chains, miss 3, and 6 double crochets. Okay, so that is now actually taking us up to that hashtag again. All right, so now again, we're not at the end yet. So we've got 3 chains, miss 2 stitches, 1 double crochet, which we're going to do twice. 3, 1, and then we start our final repeat. For me, for you, if you're doing the blanket, you'll still be in the middle. So I'll go through this all one more time. So this is now, if you're at your final repeat, remember we're starting it with 5 double crochets. So we've got a little run of 6 there. 1, 2, 3, 4 chains, miss 1, 2, 3 stitches, 1 double crochet, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3 we're missing, 6 double crochets. So that now takes us to that hashtag again. So for me, I'm now at the end. Okay, so what we now do, when we now got to the end there, to that hashtag, what we're now going to do is skip where it says 3 chains, miss 2 stitches, 1 double crochet twice. We're not doing that. We're going straight to the bit that it tells you. Now, what we now have is the pattern tells you to repeat the bits in the box till you get to the last 6 stitches. And a little note about that. It's because we're always doing 1 more chain than the number of stitches we're missing. To tell you the number of stitches at the end can sometimes, if we've missed any stitches, be confusing. So for that, any of these chains, when you're counting like what's left on the previous row, if any of them are chains like this, not the edge chain, but the other chains, you don't count them. Just pretend they're not there. Okay, so it's literally just the number of stitches that are left remaining on this previous row. So it says work to the last 6 stitches. Now I have actually included the edge chains in that because they work differently to the others. So these pattern chains won't be included, but the edge chain will. So we have got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stitches left. Okay, and we've now got to that hashtag again. So what we're now going to do is just complete the row with 3 chains, 1, 2, 3, miss 1, 2 stitches, and then we've got our double crochet there. And now remember, if you're not doing the optional stitches, you won't now have another stitch left, but I have. So we've now got another double crochet, 1 edge chain, and finally a double crochet there. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. And what you should see is the end, because this is a symmetrical pattern, is a mirror image of the start. So we've got our, you see, we've got our final double crochet, a chain and 2 double crochets there, and we started the same way, yeah, the other way around. Brilliant. So that is foundation row 3. Now for foundation row 4, and I'm not going to be showing you every row. If you look at the written instructions, we won't be showing you the wrong side rows after this one, because all you do is you basically work the stitches as they are set, which means that every time you see a stitch, and at the moment all of the stitches are double crochets, but we will soon have some trebles as well, but whatever the stitch is, you're now going to be working a double crochet into it on the way back. And every time you see a chain, you work the same number of chains above it. Okay, so 1 turning chain, 1 double crochet, 1 edge chain, and then it's just a case of going along where we've got double crochets, where we've got any stitches, we double crochet, and then do the chains over the chains. Now if you can't remember how many chains you did, you can either read the pattern sort of backwards from the previous row, and just where it says chain 3 you chain 3, wherever it says either a treble or a double crochet you do a double crochet, or probably the easiest way is just pop down a couple of rows and count how many you've missed. So we've missed 2 stitches here, so we now know we've got to do 3 chains, yeah, because we're always doing 1 more chain than the number of stitches we've missed. Right, so double crochets in all of the stitches, 4, 5, 6, and we missed 3 stitches there, so we're going to do 4 chains. Okay, so carry on along like so, and I will see you when you've completed foundation row 4, ready to start the first actual pattern row. Okay, so I've now got to the end of my last foundation row, so this is how it looks on the wrong side. So I turn it over, it looks pretty similar on the front. So we've now finished with our CC2 colour for a little while. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut that off. Again, leave sort of 4 to 6 inches there, so you've got enough to play with to weave it in at the end. Chop that off. Okay. So, and what I've also picked up, before we actually start our first proper foundation row, our first proper pattern row, you'll notice a couple of markers there. What I probably should have said, because obviously these are just slightly different to these, we were missing 3 stitches there and 2 there. Can be a little bit tricky, especially if you're making a wider project, to see where you're up to. So what you can do is you can actually, to help you see that, if you pop a little marker into like the last stitch of each repeat, that'll sort of help you to see where you are. So if you remember, on foundation row 3, we ended our repeat with the 3 chains, missed 2 stitches, 1 double crochet twice, yeah, so that would be there. So I'm going to put that in there, so I've basically moved it up. Okay, so take you through it, it'll make a little bit more sense when we now do the next row. So I'm just going to do the same thing here. Okay, so we've now marked the last sort of stitch inside my bold line repeat box, or at the end of the repeat and the written instructions. Okay, so now we're going to go back to our main colour again. So we're just going to pick that up, and just like we did when we joined the new colour down here, we're just going to pull that through there. So make sure you don't pull this bit too tight, okay, because we don't want it to bunch up too much, so just sort of leave that there. Not too loose either, but just leave it so it's sort of nice and flat. Pull that stitch down, okay, then our turning chain. So as always, we're going to start with our edge stitch, our first double crochet, 1 chain, and then I've got 1 double crochet, which is the optional one. Okay, so pattern row 1 now needs another double crochet. Now we've come to these chains. When you see chains from like this on your previous rows, you know you're going to have to do a treble because we've got to cover them up. Remember, we were leaving a space for our pattern to sort of go over. So what we do with this is a treble into the stitch here. Now what you need to remember is it's very tempting to work over the chains like so, okay, but if you do that it won't look so pretty and neat on the front. Okay, you'll cover up the chains, but if you've got any vertical lines in your pattern, that will put bumps on them if you go over them. So I always say you should work in front of the chains. Okay, so make sure your hook comes up in front of those chains before you make the stitch. Now I am very careful with my inset mosaic designs that I never leave really long chains. That's why you'll find in a lot of the patterns there's like little dots and things between motifs, just to make sure that your chains are no more than probably about 5 or 6 chains long. For baubles, my longest chain length is the 4, so I don't ever miss more than 3 stitches. Okay, so that's not too bad. It's not going to get caught up there, I don't think. All right, so we've now started there. We've got our 2 trebles, 3 down, then we've got 1 double crochet, and that now takes us up to the beginning of our first formal repeat. Okay, so it's just in exactly the same place as it was before. So we've now got 5 double crochets, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then we've got 3 trebles, so they are 3 trebles 3 rows down. So this would be 1, 2, that's the 3rd row down. So you should always be working, or you'll generally be working into the same color. Obviously when we switch our contrast colors, then you'll be working into the other one. But okay, so we've got our 3 trebles there. Now we are not going to be working into this next one. We need to leave a space there because our contrast color is going to go into there on the next row. So we're missing 1 stitch, so that's 2 chains. Okay, then 3 trebles again. Okay, so that is how you do inset mosaic. Okay, so we've now got our 6 double crochets, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and now we've got our hashtag again. So that is telling us that we're going to be doing 2 trebles, 1 double crochet twice. Okay, so we'll do that together. 2 trebles, 1, 2, 1 double crochet, 2 trebles, and then our final double crochet is there in our marked stitch. So there we go, that explains now hopefully a little bit better about why I put the marker there. So what I'll now do is move that marker up. Okay, so that's it. So that is how you do inset mosaic crochet. So to carry on repeating that across until you get to the hashtag on your final repeat, and I'll meet you there. Okay, so I've now got to the end of my first pattern row, to that last sort of hashtag there. And do you remember what I said before about the stitch count at the end? So if you notice on the written instructions, it says you repeat to the last 4 stitches, ending the last repeat at the hashtag. Now, if you're looking at the chart, you'll think, well, I've got 6 stitches left because there's 6 boxes left on the chart. But if you actually count your stitches, you'll have 7 left because there's 3 chains there, 4, 5, the edge chain, 6, and that's 7. So so to make things hopefully clearer and easier to follow, as I said before, we ignore any chains that we used to make our pattern. We're going to count our edge chain because that works differently, but these ones where you've basically got 1 more chain than the number of stitches you're missing, we totally ignore. So on our last row we have actually got 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches left. Hopefully that makes things clear. Right, so now we've done that and we've got to our last repeat, we now just need to finish off as it says. So we're finishing off with 2 trebles. Then we have got, basically, we've got 2 double crochet. So we've got 1 double crochet that everyone will do. And then there's the optional one, which you'll do depending on how you feel about having that extra sort of plain stitch between the border and the main pattern. Okay, 1 edge chain and 1 double crochet. All right, so now we're going to go back. Let's say every return row will basically be the same. So it's a turning chain. Then we start with our first double crochet, 1 edge chain, miss the edge chain, and now we're going to do double crochets into every stitch. So these first 2 on the previous row were double crochets. Now we have got 2 trebles, so the trebles are sort of hiding behind these chains here, but we still do a double crochet into them. Okay, so it's just double crochets into all of the stitches and chains over every chain. So I think on this row all we had it's nearly all going to be double crochets, apart from sort of in the middle of the repeat where we have, and I'm now coming up to it, where we did 2 chains and missed 1 stitch. There we go. So see it there. Sometimes it's going to be a little bit trickier to see when you've got all these chains, but there we go. So last stitch, 2 chains, miss those chains, and then just carry on along. So carry on along and do that, and I will see you ready to do pattern row 3. Okay, so I've now got pattern row 3, and that's where we're going to bring in our other contrast colour. So this will be the colour for the main body of the baubles, and for that I found this lovely Stylecraft colour twist yarn. So haven't used it in this pattern before, I haven't tried it out before, but I think it's going to look lovely, so we're going to now be using that. So as we did before, to join it, leave a long enough tail that you can weave in it later, and we're just going to pull that through there, pull our main colour down, and then it's time, whoops, so that's our turning chain, and I'm just going to work over that end just for that first stitch to hold it in place while we're working. Okay, so now we've got our edge chain, I'm going to miss that chain, and we've got 1 double crochet. Now remember, that was an optional double crochet. So now if you now look at the written instructions, or indeed the chart, you'll see that we go instantly into, we'll be missing 2 stitches. So we've got 3 chains to miss 2 stitches. So obviously if we hadn't had that optional double crochet there, we would have had our edge chain, then 3 chains, miss 2 stitches. So if you're not doing the optional double crochet, what you'll have here at the beginning, you'll have your first double crochet, then you'll have 4 chains and you'll be missing 3 stitches. So they say this is the main reason why, well, that and the fact that it's easier to then find these chains when you're doing your border, that's why I've added this extra optional double crochet in there. Okay, so we've now got, as I said, 3 chains, miss 1, 2 stitches, then 2 double crochets. Oh, you want to pick up all of the strands of your yarn when you do that. 2 double crochets. Okay, so that is now, all of this is before our sort of repeat box, before our main repeat starts. So we're now going to start the repeat with another 3 double crochets. Okay, so that will obviously give us 5 in a row there. Okay, so now we've got 4 chains, 1, 2, 3, 4, which means we're going to be missing 3 stitches. Then we've got 2 double crochets, and then 1 treble. So obviously that's sort of flapping around a bit there. We dig under there, making sure again that you keep your hook in front of that chain, so that will now firm all that up. Then we've got 2 more double crochets. Okay, then we've got 4 chains, 3, 4, we're missing 1, 2, 3 stitches, and then we've got 5 double crochets. 2, 3, 4, 5. So that now takes us up to our hashtag again. So as we know, we're now going to just carry on. We're going to ignore that hashtag until we get to the end, to our last repeat again. Okay, so now carries on with 4 chains, miss 3 stitches, and then our repeat ends with 2 double crochets. Okay, and we know we're right because that's right in our marked stitch. Okay, so carry along like so until you get to that hashtag on your final repeat, and I will see you there. Okay, so I've now got to that hashtag on my final repeat again, and as the pattern says, you have to work to your last 5 stitches, and as you can see, we have got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stitches remaining, so we know we're spot on there. So we are just going to end it with 3 chains, 2, 3 chains, miss 2 stitches. So I'm using the optional double crochet, so I'm now going to work a double crochet in there. If you weren't, you'd now go straight to your edge chain, so obviously you would have had 4 left, not 5. Okay, so that's 3 chain, miss 2 stitches, 1 optional double crochet, 1 edge chain, 1 double crochet. Okay, then we'll do our turning chain, turn, and we'll go back as we did before, a double crochet into every stitch and a chain over every chain. So if you can't remember how many chains you did, just count how many stitches you missed and add on 1. All right, so you can just carry on now because I've now shown you basically the principle of inset mosaic, all of the details. So you've got the chart and you've also got the full written instructions in the pattern, so just follow whichever suits you best. And then I'll come back later on and I'll show you how we do both types of border. Okay, so I've now finished my swatch and I'm ready to add border. So for this little part of the video, I'm actually going to show you the sort of single. It's more an edging really rather than a border. It's just sort of just put a little narrow frame around the edge. It's nearly nice and simple. Works brilliantly for inset mosaic crochet because of the way, if you remember, I think I said at the beginning, not sure now, but how inset mosaic will, compared to overlay, will stretch the design, but actually each individual row is a little bit shorter. I guess the main reason for that is that we're working into both loops all the time, so that just makes the stitches, they're not quite square, they're a little bit squashed. So, and because most people chain slightly tighter than their normal stitches, that actually works in really well with working down the edge of the blanket with moss stitch, which is I think there's lots of different names for it. It might be, what did you say, granite stitch, linen stitch, but it's basically 1 double crochet, 1 chain that you repeat around. So that's what we're going to do here. So the last row that we did was actually on the wrong side, so when you did it, this would have been the start of your row, but because we're starting on the right side, or we're working on the right side of our work, I'm going to call it the last chain space on the row, just because it's at the end where your last one would normally be. So if you're right-handed, that will be on the left-hand edge of the top of your blanket. If you're left-handed, it'll be on the right-hand edge. It doesn't actually matter which corner you start in, but for making the written instructions make sense, I'm starting in this corner here. Okay, so you can see we've got all our little chain spaces down the edge now. So I'm going to start. You'll probably be aware, if you've seen any of my other videos where I do borders, if I'm working in the round, so I'm going to be joining up with my first stitch at the end again. I don't usually put a knot on my hook. I don't usually use a slip knot to start. I just, when I'm doing a standing stitch, I'll just twist the yarn round like so. Okay, that gives me a loop on there, but there's no actual knot. Okay, so I'm going to start the double crochet in that last chain space there, then 2 chains. So we're only doing the 2 chains in the corners, just getting us around the corner. Okay, 2 chain and then another double crochet. So that's in that corner space. So now we're going to be working down this edge just into these chain spaces. Can you see there if I stretch it out a little bit? Oh, should have also mentioned the hook size. So The pattern is written for 4mm and 3.5mm hooks, so we've been using 4mm all the way along through the main body of our blanket. So we now need to drop down to a smaller hook. Now actually this is, you'll probably see this is a 3.25mm, but that's because I tend to crochet a little bit looser nowadays, so I've used a slightly smaller hook. I was using a 3.75 for the body, so I've just dropped it down 0.5mm there. If you find that you do your chains a little looser than the average, then you may even want to make it slightly smaller. Okay, right, so we've now done our corner. So as I said, moss stitch is just one chain, one double crochet, and it's just a case of where you put the double crochets. So what we're going to do for this, I'm going to start in this first one here, just to give a little bit of extra, sort of half a stitch extra in the corner. So I'm going to start with a double crochet there, then one chain, and then we're going to miss this chain space, and we're going to work our double crochet into the next one. Okay, so that is what we're doing all the way along. One chain, miss one chain space, double crochet into the next chain space. Okay, one chain, miss that chain space, double crochet in there. So what you can see, we're basically just working between the colours. Okay, I'm going to do that all the way along the edge. I mean, if you find when you start your first one is in the middle of each like colours, so you're in the opposite, that's fine. But as long as you do the same all the way along, you'll know you've got it right. And you see, hopefully there, it's laying quite nice and flat. Okay, so just carry along the edge like so. One chain, miss a chain space, double crochet into the next chain space. Do that all the way along, and I will see you when you get to the next corner. Okay, so I've now got almost to the next corner, so this is now the bottom edge, the starting edge of my blanket. So just got, there's another thing I probably should have mentioned. I haven't woven in all of my ends yet, just because I didn't want to risk like closing up any of these chain spaces. So if you leave the weaving in until after you've done your edging, that'll be slightly different for the double border, but if you're doing the single edging, best to just sort of leave it until the end, and then we make sure it means that we've kept it nice and easy to find our chain spaces. Okay, so just going to do the last double crochet there, one stitch, and you can see by missing the next chain that I've got to work in on this edge is also the first one on this bottom edge. Okay, so we're just going to do our corner exactly the same as we did at the top. One double crochet, two chains, one double crochet. Okay, now about to start on the bottom edge of our blanket, doing the edging round here. So we're going to start that with one chain, and we're going to miss the next stitch, and then if you look, we've got some square brackets in the pattern, and that says one double crochet, one chain, miss one stitch. We do that twice. Okay, so one double crochet, one chain, miss one stitch. Then you have one double crochet, one chain, but then we're not going to miss the next stitch. Okay, now the reason for this is, as I've said before, most people work their chains a little bit tighter than their normal stitches, so that is just to stop the bottom of our blanket sort of gathering up. Okay, so every now and then we're just going to have the chain, but we're not going to miss a stitch. Okay, so I've just now done the next bit, see? So I didn't miss the stitch, and I'm now effectively started again with the first double crochet in those square brackets. So one chain, miss one stitch, then again one double crochet, one chain, miss one stitch. Then we have one double crochet, one chain, don't miss a stitch. Okay, so that's the repeat. So now it's one double crochet, one chain, miss a stitch, and again miss a stitch, then one double crochet, one chain, and then we're not going to miss the next stitch. So if you now look, what you've got after the first one, we have got 1, 2 where we've missed stitches under the chains, and then one where we didn't. So that's what you're going to be seeing. So if you get lost with where you are in the repeat, you just need to check that you've got 2 missed stitches under the 2 chains there, and then on the next one you're not missing the stitch. Okay, so we've got the 2 there that we've missed, so we know we're not missing this one. Hopefully that makes sense. So just carry along like so all the way along. So it's still 1 double crochet, 1 chain all the time, but where you put your double crochets every third time, you're not missing the stitch underneath. Okay, so as I said, carry on along like so, and I'll see you when you get to the next corner. Okay, so I'm now almost to the end of this edge. I've just got now, I've now got just the 1 more stitch to skip before we actually get to that chain space at the bottom. So time for the corner. So as with all the other corners, 1 double crochet, 2 chains, 1 double crochet in there, and then we'll have 1 chain. Now we follow the instructions sort of slightly differently to the other side, just to basically keep it the same. So if you remember, on the other edge I was basically working my double crochets into the sort of chain spaces between the colours. But if I followed the instructions exactly as were written for the first edge, then we'd be working in it. It's just how the work chain spaces with the rows, how they work out. So it's up to you. You can work into that one, or you can keep it looking the same at each end. What we'll do, we'll actually miss this first chain space and we'll work into that one. So that's what I'm going to do. It doesn't really matter, it's not really going to show in the end. Okay, so it's the same as we did on the other edge. 1 chain, miss 1 chain space, 1 double crochet. Oh, so there's those ends that I haven't woven in yet, so we'll have to come back later and just weave these in, but there aren't too many of them. It's only where you change colours really. Okay, so another thing you'll probably notice is that the chain spaces on this edge seem to be a little bit further away from the edge than they do when we went on our first sort of edge of the border. I think there's 2 reasons for that probably. One is we've got these sort of floats here that where we carried the unused yarn up, so that makes it seem wide, and also I think the anatomy of the stitches probably means that the chain is fractionally further in, but don't worry, that will not be particularly obvious when you finish this. So we're just going to carry on with 1 chain, miss 1 chain space, and then 1 double crochet. Okay, so again, do all that all the way up. I suppose it's easier to just say, remember there, if you're going between the colours all the time, you don't really have to think too much. Okay. Okay, just 1 more edge to do on here. So when you get to this point, finished your repeats, you'll either have like no chain spaces left before you get to the end, or you'll have 1. Doesn't really matter, no one's going to know at the end once you finished your edging. So I've got no one else. I'm just going straight into that corner, which is absolutely fine. So I'm going to do my standard 1 double crochet, 2 chains, 1 double crochet in there, and then we're just going to go along the bottom exactly the same as we did at the top. So starting with 1 chain, miss 1 stitch, 1 double crochet. Okay, then it's 1 chain, miss 1 stitch, 1 double crochet twice, then 1 chain, don't miss 1 stitch, 1 double crochet. Okay, so just like we were doing at the top, you're missing out of the repeat, you're missing the stitches on 2 like so, and then when you get to the next one, it's your chain, but you don't miss a stitch. Okay, So say just as like same as we did on the bottom edge. So carry on along like so, and I'll see you when you get to the end of the round, which is also obviously the beginning of the next round. And just sort of say you can see where we've missed the 2 stitches, we didn't miss one, missed 2, we didn't miss one. Okay, so I've now got to the end of the round, which is obviously also the start of the round. Now when you get here, you'll find you've either got a stitch left or you haven't. It doesn't really matter with the repeat. Just yeah, just if you've only got like that, so you're still missing one till the end, that's great. If you find that your last double crochet ended up in there, that also doesn't matter. Just carry on. Make sure you do that chain though. Okay, so now all we're going to do is join up with a slip stitch in there. Okay, so what I've now done, if you see, I've just actually picked up my starting end there, and I'm just going to tuck that when I now do the first corner on round 2 of the border. I'm just going to tuck that underneath there just to keep it safe, but obviously we will still be weaving it in at the end. Okay, so we're now going to slip stitch into that 2 chain space in the corner. Okay, then you've just got a chain. Now that doesn't count as a stitch, it is actually just basically our turning chain. It's to get our hook up to the right level, and then we're going to start again with our, and I'm working over this end, that's optional, I just like to do that there, hold it secure. So we've got a standard corner, which is 1 double crochet, 2 chain, 1 double crochet. Okay, and so all we're going to do now, really easy, is we're going to carry on all the way around the edge, working 1 chain, miss the stitch, 1 double crochet into the chain space. So we're not missing any chain spaces or anything this time, because we've done all of that on the previous round. So this is just standard moss stitch, linen stitch, granite stitch, or so many names for the same thing, but it's 1 chain, miss 1 stitch, 1 double crochet all the way around until you land into the corners, where you're going to do 1 double crochet, 2 chains, 1 double crochet into the corner chain spaces. So just carry on doing your 1 double crochet, 1 chain, miss 1 stitch, 1 double crochet, 1 chain, miss 1 stitch all the way around. I'll actually see you just when you get to the next corner just to run through that, but that is basically it for this edging. Okay, so I've now just got to the next corner, and as I said, so we've got our chain there, we're still missing this stitch, and we've now got to our 2 chain space in the corner. So it's just 1 double crochet, 2 chains, 1 double crochet in there, and then we carry on around. So it's basically all the way around, you've got double crochets in all of the chain spaces and a chain above all of the stitches until you get to the corners, and in those 2 chain spaces in the corners you just work 1 double crochet, 2 chains, 1 double crochet. So carry on all the way around the edge like that, and then basically you can leave it like that if you wish, just this narrow little edging, or you can do as many rounds as you like. Just keep repeating this round 2 until your edging's the width that you want it. If you want to add some extra colours in, you can. It's just moss stitch. Okay, so I'll see you when we get back to the beginning again. Right, I've now got round all the way around on row 2 of my edging here. So just want to show you what you'll do on the corners. So I think I'm going to do an extra round. So to do that, obviously what we're going to do, we're going to work, so I've got my last chain and I'm missing this last stitch, so I'm now working into this first stitch in the corner. I'm just going to slip stitch into there. Okay, so that will be, so I've now joined up round 2, and I'm going to do exactly what we did at the beginning of round 2 again. We're going to slip stitch into that 2 chain space, 1 turning chain, then 1 double crochet, 2 chains, 1 double crochet. Okay, so that's what you do for every row, and you just basically carry on as we have been. One chain, miss the stitch, double crochet into the chain space. You're doing that all the way around. Okay, and then when I'm going to just do the 3 rounds I think on here, so what I will do, carry on around like that, and when I get back to the end I'll show you how I finish it off. You can just finish it off with a slip stitch if you want, but if you do an invisible join, that just makes it nice and easy and much neater. I know it's only 1 stitch, so probably no one would notice anyway, but I'll just show you how I do my invisible join at the end. Okay, so I've now got to the end of round 3, and for me, I'm going to leave it there. Just like a nice little edging to finish it off, I think. So what I'm going to do, rather than, as I said, rather than doing a slip stitch into there, like we did before when we were carrying on, I'm going to do an invisible join. So if you don't know how to do that, I'll just run you through it. So what we need to do, don't actually sort of fasten anything off. I've just ended with a chain. And I'm going to be missing this last double crochet, okay? And I'm now going to cut that off to, I don't know, about 6 inches. Okay, 15 centimeters, 6 inches, something like that. And then we pull this loop through there. So you can see we've now got 1 strand of yarn sticking out of our last chain. So what I'm now going to do, thread that onto a tapestry needle. Now we're not going to, like I said, if we were carrying on and we were going to slip stitch into this stitch, we'd go into these loops here. If we do that now, we're going to basically be creating like an extra chain there. So what we're going to do when you do an invisible join, you basically need to replace these top loops of your sort of first stitch there with the new ones on the end. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to insert my needle there. I'm going to insert it here, which is like right on the edge of those 2 corner chains. Okay, so pull that through. Now don't pull it too tight, because it needs to look about the same size as all your other stitches and chains. Okay, you see that? So I've not pulled it too tight, and what I'm now going to do, I'm going to insert my needle back where it came out here. Okay, so insert that down there like so. And again, just pull it tight enough so it looks like, there we go, looks like all the other stitches. And that's why it's an invisible join. You can't actually see the difference. So now all we've got to do, like with all our other ends, we've now just got to weave this end in. So turn it over, and you want to just, again, make sure you don't go across this space, because when we're doing the moss stitch, we'll just come across here and pull our down there like so to get that away from the edge, and make sure you don't pull this too tight. There we go. We want to make sure we leave that looking nice and neat and invisible. Okay, so now just weave backwards and forwards a few times. Okay, make sure this end is nice and secure. I'm going to go that way a little bit. Okay, and now pick up there and come back again. Okay, so just go backs and forwards a few times, and probably just go around this way just to get this end away from the corner. Okay, like so, and then one more there. All right, okay, and then cut that off nice and close. So you just now need to go along, do the same obviously with this end, and if we go along here, this is now the time, this is what this looks like on the back, to sort of weave these ends in. Okay, so what I'll do with this one at the top, so we don't have this sort of weird knot showing, I'm just going to basically go underneath these corner stitches to start with. There we go, so that sort of disappears, and then it is just a case of weaving that end in. Okay, back one more time, and then you'll be able to trim that off. So just go down doing the same with all of these. Trim them off and then you're sorted. Okay, so I've just done this little swatch here, just of a single bauble, so I can just run through with you how to make the envelope border. So the basic principle is very similar to what I do for my chain start border method on my overlay mosaic crochet patterns. So we've got a hook that's a little bit smaller than the one we were using for the main body of the blanket. So I've got a 3.5mm because I was using my 4mm hook for the main swatch. It's trial and error. Some people will have slightly different gauges. You might need to adjust the size a little, but that's usually a good place to start. I've also got, as I always do with the borders on my overlay mosaic ones, I've got basically a little pile of markers here, so we can just pop a marker in the corner chains, just so it's easier to find that. Okay, so you've got your slightly smaller hook. Now the pattern is written to use basically this colour, the sort of CC2 colour for the border, but to make it easier for you to see the stitches when I'm now doing it on my little swatch here, I've actually got a contrasting yarn. You can do it like that, entirely up to you which colours you use. Okay, so we have got the right side facing, so we're going to start with the front of our blanket. Okay, so the right side facing. And I mean, you can start in any corner, but to make the sort of the instructions make sense, we need to be basically doing or working into our chains down the edge first of all. So in the pattern, I tell you to start in the last chain of the last row of the blanket. Now, technically, because you worked the last row on the reverse, that would be like the first chain you worked, but to make things easier, it's always, if I say the first or last chain, it means as you are actually looking at it. So from the right side, it will be this one. I can't say left or right because if you're left-handed, it'll be opposite to the right-handed, okay? Which is why I'm saying it's going to be the last chain you worked on the final row as you are looking at it from the right side. Hopefully that makes sense. So I'm going to start with a standing treble. Okay, so we're going to put that now, because I'm going to be joining up at the end of the round. I don't usually bother with a slip knot when I'm doing my standing stitches there. I will just literally twist the yarn around like so to give me that loop. Entirely up to you. Okay, so we've got, I'm going to make our treble right in just in the front loop of this last chain there. Okay, so just into that loop. Oops. You can see I actually have already used this swatch to take some photos, so that's why the loop looks a little bit bigger there. Okay, so we're going to do our treble in there. Okay, now what we're going to do, we will be working another treble into that same loop, but not yet. We're going to finish the round with that because I always like to finish right absolutely in the corner. Okay, so we have now got our chain, so this is our corner chain, and then we're going to work 2 more trebles in there. Okay, so don't worry that gets a bit stretched, that'll all sort itself out in the end. So what I'm going to do, just in case you're struggling to see it, it's a little bit easier when you're doing trebles than if you were doing double crochets, but just going to pop a marker in that chain anyway, and then we'll know exactly where our corner chains are. Okay, so now I'm going to work down the side, and what we've got to do, so we've already done that top row, we're now going to basically be working into these chains that we made at each end of our blanket when we were making it. Okay, so you've got just into that front loop there of that chain, I'm going to do a treble. Okay, and then we're going to work into the front loop of the next 2 trebles. And now what we're going to do, now as you can see on this, every other, although the contrast colours changed, the main colours are always the same. So an easy way to make sure that you get the same number of stitches on both sides of your border is, because we're going to now be working 2 trebles together, is to just do them, apart from right at the top and right at the bottom, every time you've got your main colour there, you're going to work, you're going to do 2 trebles together. Okay? And so for 2 trebles together, you're just going to still insert into that front loop. Just pull through that first 2 loops. Don't complete that stitch. Let me do it again. Whoops. There. Okay. Oh, I haven't got it tensioned right. There we go. So we've got our 3 loops on our hook now. Yarn over and pull through all of them. So now I've got 2 little legs of my stitch, but only 1 loop at the top. All right. So that'll just stop our border being all wavy. So now we've got to a contrast colour, so we're just going to do straightforward treble in each of those. So that's the front loop of each of those chains. So it's always as we're looking at it. All right. So now we've come to the main colour again. So we're going to do treble 2 together. Okay. So again, treble, treble, and then treble 2 together. So you just carry on along this edge, and I will meet you just before you get to the next border, the next corner. Okay, so I've now got down to more or less at the end of this edge of my little swatch here, and I've now finished the 4 stitches, or worked across the first 4 stitches of that last repeat, and I haven't got enough to do the same double crochet, treble 2 together, 2 trebles before I get to the end. So what I'm just going to do is now just finish off, just front loop, by doing just treble in those last 2 chains there, and now we're right at the very bottom edge of the blanket. So we're now going to be in this first chain here. Okay, so we're going to do a complete corner this time, which is 2 trebles, 1 chain, 2 trebles. Okay, just to get us around the corner, and so I'm just going to pop that marker in there like so. Okay, and now what we're going to do along this bottom edge, and this is why if you were doing the envelope border I said to work into the back bumps of that bottom chain, because we need these 2 loops here, because for this front border just now I'm going to work all the way across, just doing our trebles just into that front loop. Okay, so all the way along like that. So you carry on and do that until you get to the next chain right at the end of the row, and I'll meet you there. Okay, so I've now got to the next corner. So just like we did on the previous one, we're still going to be working just into this front loop, and it's going to be, front loop, get here. There we go. So 2 trebles, 1 chain, 2 trebles. Okay, and then just going to pop that marker in there. Like I say, if you can see that chain all right, don't worry about the marker. But okay, so now when we come up this side, it's going to look a little bit different to when we did the other edge, because of the way the stitches work, where the top loop isn't quite in central on the post of the stitch. So if you're right-handed, that will be slightly to the right. So that means that and also because we've got a sort of yarn floats up the side where we're carrying it, it's going to look like this chain is further in from the edge, but we're still going to be working into the chain. Okay, so if you're struggling to see, just stretch it out. You can see there's the chain. All right, so we're still working just into that front loop like so. All right, so all the way down, and again actually they're actually looking, because we're now sort of going up the blanket rather than down, the loops just seem to be a little bit further to the left as well. So we've now actually got 2 white loops here, cream in fact. All right, so just as long as you do the same on the front and the back, that's fine. All right, so we started like so. Now we've still got 2 there. Okay, treble 2 together there. Okay, then we've just got on our contrast colours, treble into both of those, and now we've got your main colour, treble 2 together. All right, so just carry on like so along this edge. Then when you get to the corner, remember in that front loop of that chain, you're gonna do your 2 trebles, 1 chain, 2 trebles, and then we're going to complete the round by going along that top row and just working into the front loop. Okay, so I will basically see you when you've done all of that, right when we get back to the, well, to the end of the round, which was also where we started. Okay. Okay, so I've now got round to the end of the round, and also picked up another marker there in a different colour, and I'll explain to you what that's for very shortly. Okay, so I've worked into the front loop of all of these stitches there, so that's now left me a nice row there of the front loops, as it'll be when we're doing the back to do the other border. Okay, so if you remember at the start of the round, I think I said that we were going to need to complete our corner here when we get to the end, because we've only got 1 treble before that chain. Okay, so we're just going to work 1 more treble into that same chain we started with. Okay, and then we're going to slip stitch into our standing treble. Now make sure you don't pull this loop here too tight, because we're going to be working into that on the next round. Okay, so what we're now going to do is slip stitch. Now you've got a choice here. You can either work this border just into the back loops of all of the stitches, which will give you the pretty line, sort of something like you've got there down the middle of your border. Or if you want it to be sort of flatter and plainer, you can work through both loops. Now I think I'm going to work through both loops. So the reason I'm telling you that now is because that will have that will make a difference to where we now do our next slip stitch. So we've basically got to slip stitch, if we're going to do the back loops only, we're going to slip stitch into that chain there like so. So we'll be leaving this front loop free. And if you're going to have a flatter border where you do your trebles through both loops, we're going to work our slip stitch into that chain space. Okay, so I am actually going to slip stitch into the chain space. So it's entirely up to you which one you do, depending on what you want to do the rest of your stitches around. Okay, so slip stitch into there, and then what we're going to do, again, don't pull that too tight. I think I probably have a bit. Let me do that again. I'm going to make sure our slip stitch, you've got the loop on that is the same size as it is for our other stitches. Okay, there we go. And then I'm going to slip stitch into that chain space, and I'm going to pop my marker in this slip stitch I've just made there. Okay, because that is where we're going to be working the final stitch of our round. So now I'm in that corner chain space. We're going to do 4 chains. Now these first 3 there, that represents the first treble there in that corner. And then the next one is the chain space, so just basically the equivalent of this marked chain there. Okay, so now also into this chain space, we're going to work 2 more trebles. Okay, so then I'm going to take this marker out here and pop that into that 4th chain there. Okay, so that's where our corner will be on the next round. Okay, so now it's just nice and straightforward to go around working either into the back loops if you prefer, or as I'm going to do, under both loops. Okay, so you'll just do that like so, and I'll come back when we get to the next corner and show you what we do there. Okay, so I've now got to this first corner here, and probably won't surprise you too much to know that we're just going to be working into this chain space. I am, like I said, if you're working into just into the back loops of the stitches, you'll just be working into the actual chain, so into the back loop of the chain as well. Okay, so it's going to be 2 trebles, 1 chain, 2 trebles. Okay, and then move that marker up to the chain space. Now it is worth, even if you can see the corner chains, it is worth actually, certainly when you get to the last round. So I mean, I'm only going to do these 2 rounds for my border on here, but if you're going to make it wider, certainly when you get to the last round, definitely make sure you put your marker in that corner chain then, even if you don't do it on the others, because that'll make it much easier when you come to actually joining the 2 borders together to know that you're starting in the corner chains for both of them. Okay, so yeah, it's just now a case of carrying on around, and make sure on this first one you don't miss this first stitch, because sometimes when you've worked all of those into a chain space, that can be covered up a bit. Okay, so just make sure you don't miss that, and just carry on around working a treble into every stitch, and then in the corners you'll be doing your 2 trebles, 1 chain, 2 trebles. So carry on like that, and I will see you when we get back to that sort of marker we put in our slip stitch at the beginning of the round, and I'll take you through that. Okay, so I've now got all the way around my border here. I'm just at that last marked slip stitch. So what we're going to do then, I'm going to take that marker out because it's in the way. We're going to now work our final stitch of the round in there. So that's basically completing our first corner then. So just get under both loops of it. Okay. So now if you're carrying on and doing more rounds, what you would do is slip stitch into this chain. Okay. And then to join. Okay. Then we'd start again with slip stitching into the corner chain or chain space and do another round. But as I'm now got to the end, so when you get to the end, what it's nice to do, rather than ending with a slip stitch, it's neater if you do an invisible join, and you'll also find it easier to make sure that you're lining up your stitches when you come to join the 2 borders together. So if you don't know how to do an invisible join, I'm just going to pull my hook out there. Chop it off with, you need to have enough of a tail, so I usually say about 6 inches or whatever there, and just pull that through, because we're going to now need to thread this onto a needle to finish it off. Okay, so what you can see now, if you look there, you've just got the 1 strand of yarn coming out of that last stitch we just did. Okay, so tapestry needle and thread that into there. So now to make an invisible join, what we're basically now going to do is create another top loop, sort of like that, for our final stitch. So if you were doing a slip stitch, you would work it into this chain here. Okay, into there, if you were slip stitching to finish off. But when you do an invisible join, you basically need to join it to the following stitch. And I'll show you hopefully what I mean. So what we're going to do, we've got our marked chain there. Just going to insert my needle like so. So it's just in that, basically through. So if you look on the back, there's just that back bump that's there, and we've got the 2 loops at the top. I've now just inserted into that chain. Okay, so I'm going to pull that not too tight, because we now need this loop to look just like all the others. Okay, and then you insert your needle back where the yarn came out there, and into that sort of other stitch there as well, so it's nice and secure. Okay, and then we're going to pull that through and just pull it tight enough. There we go, so that looks just like all of the other stitches. Okay, so that's why it's an invisible join. You can't now see where the join is. So we just now need to weave that in. We're going to need to weave this end in as well, but so what I'll do with that is just bring down here. So although the ends are going to be in the border, you do need to make sure they're nice and secure so that doesn't all unravel. Okay, so then if you don't want to go straight underneath there because you may well pull out what you just did. So if you just go to the next stitch, come back, okay, and again don't pull any of this too tight because we don't want to mess up our nice new neat loops that we just created. And then I'm just going to go again, make sure you've got an extra loop there, go back the other way, and that should be fine. All right, so then we can chop that off. Might as well leave a little bit longer because that's going to be hidden inside the border anyway. So I just need to do the same with this end to make that all nice and secure, and then I'll come back and we will do the border, the wrong side border. Okay, actually one thing I think I forgot to mention before we did our front border, so I've now turned it over, so we're now on the wrong side. One thing I forgot to mention is that we really need to make these ends secure. So you can weave them backwards and forwards in the main body of the blanket if you wish. But what we can do as well, as we are doing a double border on this one, we can actually still hide them in the border a little bit like we do with the overlay. So to do that, just going to need to take, if I pick one up, thread it onto your needle, and we're going to just take it right back out, you can see, to the edge there. Okay, and I'll do that with each end. So make sure you're not closing up like the chain spaces there, but just make sure you're at the end. So if you do that with each one, you've then got the two, because wherever you basically, or usually wherever you had one, you fastened off one, you've got, like, you start the next colour. So if you carry on and do that, so you've got them in pairs still, and then we're going to just knot those together. Okay, make them extra secure, pull it nice and tight, there we go, that's not going to go anywhere. So do that with each of the pairs. If you've got, like here we've got 3, you can actually tie 3 together, that'll be fine. Okay, and then we're going to just chop them off to about 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters, 1 inch, something like that. And then when we do the borders, that'll just tuck down and that'll be hidden in there. And that means you haven't got to actually weave backwards and forwards there, making the slightly stiffer bit in your blanket, and also it's more fiddly. Okay, so go on and do that, and then I'll come back and show you how we actually now do. It's basically going to be a repeat of what we did on the front, but we're doing it on the back, so that's nice and easy, but I'll see you in a moment for that. Okay, so I've tidied up my ends, and I've got some more stitch markers because we'll want them for the corners again, and also for that slip stitch at the end of the round. So like I said, we're basically doing exactly the same now as we did on the front side. Okay, so we're going to start with a standing treble in this remaining chain there of our corner chain, so you can see where all the stitches were before, so we're just going to work into there. Okay, so again I've started with the in the corner, the final chain on the corner as I'm looking at it, which actually was the final chain of the blanket this time because we're on the back. Okay, then we've got our chain and 2 more trebles in there. Okay, and then we're going to turn around, and remember what we did, we worked into front loop of all of these chains. Maybe a little bit trickier to see the chains on the back than it was the front, just because you've already worked into the stitches, but if you give it a little stretch you should still be able to see where they are. Okay, so remember what we did on the front was we did a treble in all of the stitches, apart from when we got, or the chains rather, where the main colour rows were, we did treble 2 together, apart from right at the beginning of the side and right at the end. All right, so for these ones here, we're going to be trebling just into each stitch, but for all of these where we've got the 2 rows for the main colour down, we're going to do 2 trebles together. All right, so just carry on around like so. So like I said, if you're finding it difficult to see the change, just give that a little stretch makes it stand out more. And then, okay, so treble, there we go, if you give it a little stretch into each of those. And now we've got to our 2 main colour chains, so we know there we've got a treble 2 together. All right, so carry on around like so, and remembering when you get to the corners, that chain at in the corner is going to have 2 trebles, 1 chain, 2 trebles at them. All right, so yeah, basically you can carry on like that. Round 2 is going to be exactly the same as we did for round 2 on the front border. So when you've got all of that done, I'll come back and I will show you how we just join them together to finish it off. Okay, so I've now completed border on the back, done my invisible join again like I did for the front border, also gone round and just made sure that I've woven in the ends on the border as well, so everything's all nice and secure. And now all we need to do is join our 2 curly borders together to make one nice lovely puffy flat squishy envelope border. So what we need to do is kind of pick a corner. You can start in any corner at all, and what we're going to start with is we're going to basically work through both of these marked chains at the same time. So it's entirely up to you again whether you work through both loops or just through the back loop, but I tend to like both loops or just through the back loop. What I'm actually going to do, even though I've gone through both loops all the way around, I think I'm actually going to join it just through the back loops, just get that extra little sort of frame around the edge, but entirely up to you. So I'm going to use the same colour for my joining round. You can definitely use a contrast if you like. I do that on some blankets and things and I love it. All right, so we start with a standing double crochet. And like I say, because I'm going to be going through just the back loops, I'm actually going to work into it's basically the inner loops of these. So it's the back loop of this marked chain, and as we're looking at it, it'll be basically the front loop of that one, but they'd be like the ones on the inside, they were the back loop as we did our borders. All right, if you wanted to go through both loops, you might want to actually work into the chain spaces. Okay, leave that up to you. So standing double crochet, and then what we're going to do in the corners here is we're just going to work 2 more. So we're going to have 3 double crochets in each corner, and then all the way around we're just going to basically pick up. So again, it's that inner loop there, yeah, like the back loop there, and then the front loop as it was worked, so, or as we're looking at it now, which would have been the back loop as it was worked. So we're going to go, ooh, try not to drop it, so inner loop, double crochet together. So I'm just going to do that all the way around. Okay, simple as that. So when you then get to the next corner, just remember to work 3 double crochets in that. Okay, so in that corner chain we're going to be doing 3 double crochets, but all the way around all the other stitches we're just going to be joining those inner sort of loops together like so. All right, so again, carry on around, do all of that, and I will see you when you get to the end, and we'll just finish it off again. Okay, so I've now cut my yarn at the end. I've got all the way around, cut my yarn, and I've threaded it onto my tapestry needle again, ready to just do this final invisible join. So what we've got, and see, this new loop that we make is going to basically replace this first one from this first standing stitch there. So don't insert your needle there, because if you do, you'll create an extra stitch. I'm going to insert it this side of those loops. Okay, and again, don't pull it too tight. And then we're going to go back into that center loop and also pick up that one behind. Okay, and then just pull it tight enough so it looks just like all of the others. Okay, so there we go. That's our invisible join. So obviously now when we're tidying up the end, we need to be a little bit more careful than we were when we did it for the front and the back borders, because we're not going to be hiding the end. That's going to be anything we do on the back there is going to be visible. Okay, so I'm going to turn that over. So this was the end from our standing double crochet. So I'm just going to pull that down nice and tight. And this is the one we've now got. So we've got to make sure the one that we've just gone round and through there, the invisible join we've just done, we mustn't pull this too tight. Okay, so what I will do is just go into that stitch. So make sure you don't go all the way through. And then when we're there, just pull that just tight enough. There we go. No tighter than that because we don't want to ruche anything up. Okay, so what you can now do is basically we can follow, so I've worked into the sort of back loops there. Just basically insert your needle like so, come out there. Okay, so we can now follow the lines on there so it sort of disappears. Okay, like so. And then just to make sure, what we can do, just go back the other way a bit, and then you just come out sort of more or less wherever you like so. Okay, so that's all sort of nice and invisible there. And then when we cut that off, we're just going to pull it ever so slightly tighter, so that when we then stretch it out again, that end completely disappears into the border. So now we just need to do the same with this one. Okay, so this end, so I'll probably do the same but go this way instead. And then that's all done. So that is how to do an envelope border around inset mosaic.